Welcome everybody to our take on the 2020 federal budget, which was handed down on Tuesday night. I don't know about you all, but it's not as good as Christmas, but it's probably one of the most important nights of the year for us. Definitely don't get present. Well, we do get some presents in some way, but we certainly look forward to analysing the announcements and looking at what it all might mean strategically. There's often a lot of things that come out of it that we can do to help in your financial affairs. And it's not just the obvious things that are immediately announced, but often it's what comes in the months after. Um, there's a lot of legislation and detail that needs to be worked through even after this budget has been announced. And we will find over the next few months a number of opportunities that we'll be able to implement for you, depending on your situation. And that's certainly something that we continue to do every year following a federal budget. And this year's definitely been super different. And due to COVID, firstly being at this time of the year in October rather than in May. And a lot of people have talked about it being the most important budget since World War II. I'm not sure about if that's definitely the case. I think, again, usually we find out how important a budget is usually in the months or sometimes the years following. So before we continue, we've got myself and Simone is here as well, our tax and technical specialist for the team. And we're just going to keep this really casual and just talk through some of our key findings from the budget from Tuesday night. You might, some of the things might impact you and might be of importance to you. And you might know other people that need to know about this stuff. So, if there's someone that you know that would benefit from hearing this, please feel free to pass it on. We're more than happy for you to do that. So, firstly, high level in terms of the budget itself, Treasurer Frydenberg has found himself in a really challenging situation, largely due to COVID. He was expecting that we'd be in surplus during this budget announcement, and through no fault of any government or anything like that, he's found himself, really that we're going to be in deficit again, and we're probably going to find that Australia's debt's going to hit around $1 trillion by 2024. So we're talking some big numbers there. They certainly, need to do what they need to do, and spending is important at this point in time. Similarly, when we went through the GFC, spending was important to make sure that our economy could get out of this difficult time that we all face. So we're non-partisan at all. We don't really we're not worried too much about the politics, but we're very interested in the policy and how that impacts your affairs, and importantly, if we can identify any threats to your situation, but also any opportunities that we can find. So, interestingly as well, the budget itself is quite positive. There's a lot of stimulus, but it does hinge on some key assumptions. Some of those assumptions, people have different opinions on those as to whether they're reasonable or not. They are Treasury assumptions, which they always are. So again, it's not about whether the government's made the right assumptions. It's about Treasury's modelling. The first assumption that's important to consider is that we'll have a vaccine by the end of 2021. So, that's a total uncertain situation, and we don't know whether that's going to happen. But that's an important assumption to be aware of. Another assumption is that the internal borders will be open by the end of 2020 between the states, which appears that it could be on track for that. Hopefully, as Melburnians, we're absolutely hoping that we can get interstate and then those borders open, Simone, don't we? So I don't think that's too unreasonable. The other interesting assumptions were to do with GDP growth. And yes, it's going to be negative, but there was the assumption that it's going to recover very rapidly and get up to 4.75% in the next year or so. Some would argue that that's very optimistic, and how can we see our country's economy coming out of it? At the same time, Deloitte Access Economics thinks that growth assumption is actually quite reasonable, because we've got a good underlying market, and we're not doing much in our market, in our economy, that much right now. So their view was that, as soon as people are flying around, as soon as people are going between borders, when people start going to restaurants, and particularly in Melbourne, start going into the office, is going to give a boost to the economy, and that growth is very achievable according to Deloitte Access Economics. So it'll be very interesting to see. As we know, economists aren't very good at predicting the future. They're very good at explaining the past. But, so we don't try and predict the future, but it's interesting nevertheless. So what we're going to do now is just talk about some of the main measures, and keep it really high level. We don't want to bore you to tears. It will take hours to go through all of the detail. We have read pages and pages of documents and analysis, and our job is to really keep it simple and bring it down to really short, sharp bits of information. And if some of it is of interest to you, then reach out to us and let us know, and we'll see if there's if we give you a bit more detail about it. One thing that was nice to see before we get on to specifics was some of the spending in the disability space. That was important, and some of the people there that are finding it particularly. And obviously with COVID and mental health, that's another area that there was some additional spending, which we think is really warranted. So if I just we've put together a few slides which we will send to you. I'm just going to share that now, and there we go. So firstly, our disclaimer: this is all general information, obviously, and doesn't take into account your personal situation. Obviously, please let us know if you do want to talk about any of the things we're going to talk about today in relation to your specific personal affairs. Simone, tell us about the tax cuts. What's happening? You're our tax guru. What's going on with tax?
Okay, so it's good news for everyone, really. Anyone earning a wage at the moment, they're basically bringing forward the proposed cuts that were on the table for about 2022, and they're bringing them forward and backdating them to 1 July this year. So most households will get a bit of a kick in their, return in their it'll be other adjusted pay-as-you-go withholding in their pay, and also maybe some in your tax return at the end of the year. And it should be about up to $2,500 for most people. Obviously that's the upper limit that it's refunded. Also, there's some further tax offsets that are going to be kept for the current year that weren't going to originally be kept, and that's also a possible another $1,000 in some household pockets as well, which is all. It's always good to have more money, and the hope is from the government that we're going to spend it in the economy. So that's great. And then there's also for the higher income earners, there's the proposed cuts for those people are still on track for 2024-25 at this point in time. There's no real changes there.
So it's great, Simone. Sorry, it's great, Simone. We're getting some tax breaks and some extra money from the tax man.
Yeah.
The less we can pay the tax man, the better, I suppose. But and I think importantly, bringing him forward, as you said, bringing forward those cuts that we were expecting in a couple of years. That's nice.
Yeah, it's always nice.
Yeah. So in terms of Social Security, Simone, there's a few things there. You did point out to me that people have already got under COVID a couple of payments of $750 already as part of stimulus for Social Security recipients. But you had some interesting thoughts on what was announced in the budget on Tuesday night.
Okay, so they've also they're making additional payments to recipients, and that's for people with age pension. Now, one really is also the Commonwealth Seniors Card holders, disability pensions, some carers allowance, family tax benefit recipients, and they're flagged a further $250 times two. Now, the key here is, though, you should be eligible if you have the card by the first one's the 27th of November 2020 to be paid in December, and or the February one in March. So, but anyone on Job Seeker, this is not applicable to you because you're already getting the COVID payments separately, different payments, bonus payments in the Job Seeker allowance.
That's good, Simone. It's really important to know the eligibility dates, because if you don't have, I think if you don't have the card on the eligibility date, that can be an issue.
That's
so anyone
correct.
that's thinking about applying, it's really worth getting on and doing that.
Because you pretty much have still time to get into that space.
Yeah, of course, we're a little bit governed by how quickly Centrelink push applications through as well, which is an uncertain thing. But I guess you give yourself the best chance the earlier you get onto it. Yeah,
that's
okay.
Correct.
Business incentives. Now, I mean, small businesses, government talked about this being a budget for jobs and really helping businesses drive the growth and use the stimulus along with spending. So there's absolutely some good benefits there for businesses for employment. But on the tax side, again, that's your area of expertise, Simone. So tell us just a little bit about that.
Okay, so obviously, well, there is the job maker, which they're trying to employ younger people who they feel have been hit very hard by the COVID into jobs. And that's sort of a benefit up to about $10,400 in wage subsidies for anyone under 35, people employing those. So that's just to try and get jobs on the board.
That's an interesting one, isn't it? That doesn't help our older workers too much, because
no, it doesn't.
It's not easy to get jobs from really experienced people in the market. So that was an interesting announcement, that one. So
it was, But that's their analysis is that the younger market's been particularly hit. So that's why they're focusing that way. The other thing is to try and get businesses to invest more money and sort of expand and grow. And doing that, they're giving new full depreciation of assets, bought in the next sort of financial year. That's quite a big incentive. Some, like small businesses with cafes, restaurants buying machinery, equipment, there's no limit on the amount. So that's a really, really good incentive to get out there and start investing. The other one that I thought was particularly interesting is you've always been able to carry losses forward to offset in future profits, but this is the reversal, which is quite interesting. So if you make a loss in this year, you can actually offset against profits going back for the last couple of years. So it's basically, if you've already paid tax on those profits, potentially going to be refunded that tax you've already paid. This is a little interesting one. It's sort of a reversal of current rules. So
yeah, I guess businesses that fall on hard times and have some losses, they may not exist into the future to actually benefit from those losses. So perhaps the government's taking the gamble that, let's let some of those businesses get a bit of tax back that they've already paid, and see if that can keep them going. It's going to be really interesting how they implement that, I guess. The tax system is complicated enough.
A little bit interesting, and there's a little, but it's all about a nomination in your tax return this year, so you sort of need to be aware of it, and I suppose I can talk to anyone that would be applicable to a little bit more in detail about it.
Yeah, so they're the sorts of things that I'm sure in the next 12 months at least we'll be spending a lot of time talking to people's accountants, so that together we can work on getting the best outcomes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great, Simone. Superannuation's a really interesting one. There's some announcements, which again we'll see what that leads to. I think it's really positive. We've seen a lot of reform in the financial advice space following the Royal Commission. It's certainly long overdue in our opinion that it's been long overdue, really, this additional regulation in financial advice, and consumers need a bit more protections, and knowing that their advisors and investments are going to do what they're supposed to do. That has gradually been flowing into the superannuation industry as well. We know we research superannuation funds all the time. Every day we're looking at all sorts of funds, whether they're self-managed super funds, whether they're industry super funds, whether they're retail bank funds, or employer sponsored funds, or wholesale funds. And so we really dig deep and read prospectuses and understand how the funds work. We also, and structurally, we also understand how their fees work and how the money's invested, really looking at it from a risk perspective. So, that's just something that we do as part of our due diligence whenever we're advising you, and whenever we're looking at options, because we always do a benchmark and always see whether there are better options in the marketplace. This seems to be something that the government's keen on providing to the public, which I think is fantastic. I think it's such a complicated, difficult space that it's very difficult for anyone to just look at a super fund and know, what am I paying? Because super funds don't disclose it very well. They hide lots of fees. It's very hard to see performance. Again, that's done. People play with performance and do a lot of data mining just to make themselves look better. So these are some of the issues that we know exist. The government and APRA are trying to, provide a bit more clarity and transparency for consumers. The intent is really great. I'm going to be very interested to see how it's implemented, and sensibly they're starting with my super accounts. It's going to be interesting to see how they implement it, and they're going to keep super funds more accountable. So super funds that are too expensive, that are underperforming and not doing a good job, they're going to have to answer for that to APRA and to their members. So we think these are really good reforms. Far too long have, big super funds, even financial advisors and various, institutions have been able to get away with, charging too much and not delivering enough value for their members. So that is a really interesting shift in the way that the government's continuing to create some transparency. Along with separate to the budget announcements on Tuesday, though, Simone, I know the government made some announcements prior to the budget, many months before. Actually, it may have been part of the previous budget even.
It was much earlier, yes.
Yeah, maybe even part of the previous budget, which some of those announcements have come in to law, but some of them have not, and it's been a bit confusing, and COVID slowing down how quickly government's being able to put legislation into place. So can you just touch on those, Simone, and give us a status update on some of those other major superannuation changes?
So they've just made it a little bit easier for people to make personal contributions. Previously, after 65, you had to meet a work test. They've now extended that to 67. And also for someone with spouse contributions, they've actually extended that out from, to 60, like up to 74, where they're meeting where they do meet a work test. But before it was a lot more restricted. Yeah, we are still waiting for some legislation around people up to 67 being able to use the bring forward rules. And that's
bring forward rules mean putting multiple contributions in
multiple. Yeah. So you sort of so rather than just your normal 100,000, you can go up to 300,000 where you pass all the other criteria. Yep. And that's quite important for some of our planning, especially as we're approaching that age. We like to maximise what we can into superannuation. So we're still waiting for that legislation to pass before we can know that for sure. But at the moment, 67 is being able to make just the normal personal contributions.
Some of you will know we've been talking to you about putting the strategy that we've been putting in place for you on hold, because we're waiting for this legislation to pass. And just due to COVID, Parliament's been dragging their feet on how quickly they do that. So we will keep an eye on that and let you know what needs to be done in regards to that. So that's superannuation. As we said, additional support in mental health, aged care, a lot of infrastructure spending announcements as well. Again, some are arguing not enough. So that brings us to the end of our budget summary. It's pretty quick, short and sharp. A lot of it you would have been able to read yourselves, but we thought we'd try and distill through the Treasurer's speech and cut back down to some of the key points. There's obviously a lot more analysis underneath it. So if you do want to know a bit more, please reach out to us and we can, we can talk you through that or explain that at any time. And we're certainly continually looking at the opportunities. And as I said, as the reforms become, the government's good at making announcements, but when it comes to implementation, it's a different matter. So it's going to take a little time before the details are worked through and we really know exactly how all of these things are going to operate. And as we identify those opportunities, we'll make you aware and make sure we take advantage of them as part of your planning. So apart from that, Simone, was there anything else you wanted to add?
Not really, no. I mean, it's just a budget really that's focused on getting us all spending. So let's get this economy going again.
Yeah, we've got to boost it, give people a bit more money to spend, give businesses some money to spend, and get that GDP growth back up.
Yeah.
And jobs. That's what he was saying. So
yeah. I think Melburnians are ready to spend if we can get out.
Exactly. Need something to spend it on.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Simone, that's great. Thanks for that. And Simone is always there, technical expert, particularly on tax matters, and a great resource to our team. So see you all very soon. And if you've got any questions about the budget, reach out and let us know. See you later.
Bye.